Okay, so this video is going to go through the very basics of media studies. More specifically, we're going to talk about something known as the key concepts. Now, these are effectively the backbone of media studies. These are they're the reason why we're here. If these aren't considered in the production of any media text, it will likely fail. As an example, if a film is produced but the key concepts aren't considered and approached correctly, in all likelihood that film will not have a good performance at the box office, as in it will not sell many tickets and therefore will not make much money, and it will be considered a box office flop. Over the next couple of years, I will be teaching you several different techniques and new language that will help you discuss these key concepts. So let's move on and talk about them briefly. There's many different models for the key concept. I personally prefer the 4 key concept model. The reason why is I find this is easiest to remember, and I also feel it approaches the really important areas of media studies succinctly and in a way that makes sense ultimately. The way I think of it is they're almost as if it's legs of a chair. Each leg is absolutely critical, and if one is taken away, the whole media product will fail. These 4 key concepts are codes and conventions, representation, audience, and institution or industry. Now, let's very briefly go through each one. Firstly, codes and conventions. This is essentially how we construct a product. Conventions are effectively the rules we should follow in producing a media text, and the codes are how these create meaning for our audience. As an example, if we look at this poster here, which is the poster for Star Wars The Last Jedi, we can instantly recognize that this is a film poster. That is because it follows the conventions of film poster design. It has a film title that's in bold font and very obvious to the eye in the center of the page. We have images of, in this case, an ensemble cast, which again are very obvious and are in a position we would expect. We also have an image here which gives us a hint at the narrative or storyline of our film. The meaning, the impact these elements create for the audience would be codes. Later on, I'll teach you some language that will help you discuss those and go into more detail. But essentially, the important thing here to know is that conventions are the rules of designing a media product, and the codes are the messages that these components send to an audience. Next up is representation. Whenever we present an individual to an audience, we are creating an impression of how they should be perceived by that audience. This is what is known as representation. As an example, we've got here the DVD box set covers for Luther, which is a BBC TV crime drama, and Sherlock, which is also a BBC TV crime drama. These 2 shows are of the same genre. They have similar budgets, they're produced by the same studio, they're both set in London, and ultimately the ingredients that make up these shows are very, very similar. What sets them apart is representation. The obvious part of that is the fact that the protagonist for Luther is played by Idris Elba, who is a black male, and then the protagonist for Sherlock, who is played by Benedict Cumberbatch, is a white male. The way in which these 2 individuals are presented to us, the way they dress, the way they behave, the way they talk, the sorts of acts they take part in the narrative affect their representation of their ethnicity. We can go deeper than that as well. As I previously said, both of these shows are set in London. But if you were to watch both, you would find that London is portrayed in a very, very different way. Luther has a far grittier, far more realistic and hard-hitting portrayal of London, whereas Sherlock is a much more glamorous, much more glitzy version of London. Both of these have elements of accuracy, but ultimately they will change an audience member's perception of London as a city. And this is the representation of London created by the show producers. Learning how to recognize what the representational issues within media texts and also learning how to talk about them is what we'd be doing over the next couple of years. Next up, we have audience. This one's pretty straightforward. You need to know who your audience are in order to sell a product to them. The design of your product will likely be affected by your target audience. Also, the way in which you promote it will be affected by your audience. Essentially, you need to design everything to appeal to these people here. So let's have a look at a quick example. Here we have two fashion magazines, Vogue and GQ. Both of them have Clara Delevingne. Sorry if I've pronounced her surname wrong. I never get that one right. But the same cover model on both. And ultimately, the ingredients, like Luther and Sherlock, are very, very similar. However, the big difference between these two is that Vogue is aimed at women and GQ is aimed at men. Both are aiming at wealthy individuals with a large amount of disposable income, who have aspirational qualities. They want the finer things in life. But the design of these two magazines is completely different simply because the audience is different. Despite wanting similar things in life and despite those ingredients that have made up this front cover being very, very similar, the people they're trying to sell this to are very, very different individuals due to their gender. As a result, the way in which these two products are displayed and designed is very, very different. Recognizing audiences, being able to talk about them, learning about techniques to discuss them is another thing we will be looking at over the next couple of years. Finally, institution, also known as industry. Either is correct. I prefer institution, but you can refer to it as industry if you'd like. It's entirely your choice. But ultimately, this is about the understanding of how products come together. Here I've put up a number of different production companies for different films, some of which you may recognize and some of which actually have house styles that set them apart. Understanding the qualities of these different production companies is key. So, for example, knowing that Pixar is quite famous for creating digital animations, knowing that 20th Century Fox is a large, big budget studio that produces very, very expensive and very, very profitable films. Those sorts of details about production companies is necessary to know. But also, how are the films made? What equipment, what technology is used in their production? How much do we spend in their production? How much do we spend on marketing the products they produce? What directors will be used? What qualities do these directors have? What actors have they used? Essentially, industry is about understanding how all of the ingredients that produce a media text come together. I've given a huge number of examples there for film alone, but every media product, every format, be it magazines, be it posters, be it video games, radio shows, the list goes on, will have different institutional backgrounds that we will need to understand and assimilate.